long because my Italian teacher is in Puglia. So I'm really interested in trying some of the local grapes.
No problem, Mary. We actually have a Negro Amaro class. Tasting that we're doing. When is that day? Do you remember, Pietro?
I think that's
the
last Friday in the month. I can't remember.
So I'll be there.
Good. That'll be a fun one.
Yeah.
Yes.
That'll be good.
I'll try and find some good Salice Salento.
Yes.
All right. Well, we have a nice little group here. What do you think? Should we get started?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Oops.
All right. Good.
The wrong thing.
Hi, Ryan. Welcome. Nice to see you too, sir. Good. All right, guys. Well, we're going to get started, I think. Thank you all for coming. This is a freewheeling roundtable discussion about certainly one of my favorite grapes, and I know Pietro is quite fond of Barbera, depending on whether he's been to the vineyard or not. We'll have to see what day he's fond of it and what day he's not. So he has much more personal connection to this grape. But we're really excited to be here and talk about it. We have just a little bit of a structure for the tasting, but I will just say that I hope all of you have taken a few moments to pull the corks on your wines, whatever you decide to open, and pour them in the glass and stick your nose in there and have a connection with something. And because we will certainly start going through these wines as more of kind of a sensory analysis, and love to hear just some of your opinions. And in my experience as a sommelier, nice, Mary, beautiful. From my experience as a sommelier, your first reaction to a wine is often right on when all is said and done. It's often the correct one. So I just wanted to put that out there. But this is a chance for all of you to take advantage of Pietro and I for the next hour and a half or so. We've got the full, I want to say, I'm not sure what else we need, but I think we have the full picture of the great Barbera, from what happens in the vineyard and in the winery from Pietro's end, and then what happens in the glass and from my end, and the different expressions throughout Piemonte, which is certainly something that I've enjoyed over the years with Barbera. I've tasted quite a lot. And so know that grape well from a perspective of Piemonte. So I am particularly excited about this, to talk to Pietro about Barbera in California. It's just not something I'm too well aware of. So please ask us questions and raise your hands and jump into the conversation. And we're gonna discover Barbera in the glass tonight. For the most part, Pietro and I are just going to give a little bit of context. But tonight's about revealing what's in the glass, and that's really where the education begins, I think. Despite, however, volumes of history and facts that Pietro and I know, it's really all about making a connection with what you're experiencing sensory, on taste and nose and palate and all that. So I urge you to jump right in. We're just going to very briefly have a very short presentation where we're each going to respectively talk about just a short history of Barbera. From my point of view, I'll talk about it in Italy. And it's a very brief history because nobody really knows too much about Barbera. And then Pietro's going to jump in and talk a little bit about Barbera growing up in the United States and where it's living right now. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the vineyard practices. I'm going to ask Pietro a couple of questions. But then kind of after that, once we get into our first wine, we're just going to open everything up and hope you all have some questions. And we get into a discussion about what happens in the vineyard or winery or in the glass or when you're in the grocery store. As one of you that I spoke to earlier today, I'm neglecting the name, I apologize. I think it was you, Jeremy. Going to the grocery store and picking out the right food for Barbera, because it's always a tricky situation with this grape. All right, cool. We're gonna get started. I guess I'll jump right in. And if you'll excuse me just a moment. I'm going to throw up a couple of maps here for you. So if you'd like, you're welcome to take my screen and enlarge it, as well as when Pietro speaks, because I'll be showing a number of maps from his area and his winery. But when it comes to Italy and Barbera, Barbera was definitely, born and bred in the northwestern corner here in Piemonte. And this is the region specifically, and here we have Piemonte, kind of a rudimentary map. You must forgive me, but it does show the important areas. When one thinks of Piemonte, they think of Barolo and Barbaresco and Langhe, and all that is just down here. The Barolo is just here, and then you have Barbaresco, and then the River Tonaro running through. But when we're talking about Barbera, we're really talking about north of that area, in Asti and Monferrato, and specifically in Casale di Monferrato. And Barbera, the history of Barbera it can be traced back to that area, if any history at all. And when I go into reading about the history of a grape, and I go into the text of Ian D'Agata and Janice Robinson and all those, and then I reach out to the winemakers that I know in Piemonte, it's always a mixed bag. Nobody really knows exactly where a certain grape has come from. You save for just a few grapes like Timorasso or Verdicchio or Vernaccia. Those are grapes that people know where they come from, know where the parents are born and bred. But Barbera is a little bit tough, and just in my research, first mentionings of Barbera are really from the records of the Casale in Monferrato, the castle of Monferrato, a beautiful area in the northern part of the area of Asti Monferrato. And those records date back to 1246 and 1277 that mention Barbera. And then you go through, and really no other documentation exists. There are some texts from some ampeliographers as well as some cartographers that mention Barbera in the 18th century and in the 19th. But really not until the 1960s and 70s does Barbera start to show up on the map in Italy. And that's a special time in Piemonte. That's when Barolo really started to gain its legs as a wine of stature, a wine of what it should be. And Barbera was not far behind. Back in the 1960s and 70s, often Barbera and Dolcetto, which we consider to be field grapes and not of noble status, like Nebbiolo, but Barbera were fetching far high prices per kilo than any of the Nebbiolo back in those days. And that's not because it was considered to be a more superior grape, but it was frankly a workhorse. It was a grape that could produce an incredibly myriad range of wines, and was very reliable on the vine in Piemonte. And of course, Pietro is probably going to speak to me a little bit about that. But that's the history of a little bit of the history of Barbera. Right up into the 1970s, you come across Émile Pénaud. He's a very famous French enologist and French wine consultant. And he was working for a winery by the name of Gancia. And he was among the very first to mention Barbera being aged in small French oak barrels, which is a very similar way that they do in Burgundy. And that's a very unique, very particular way of aging your wine. As the smaller barrels, there's a lot more surface area for this juice and a lot less volume for this grape juice to pull in the tannin and the essential aromas that come from barrels, so on and so forth. And it wasn't until about 1979 when someone actually did that. And that was the producer that you have in your second bottling. You'll see on the label it says Braida, which is the name of the winery, so to speak. But the term Braida comes from a gentleman by the name of Giacomo Bologna, who was the first person to purchase single vineyard Barbera, essentially, and make it into something. And Braida was his nickname growing up in Asti. And when you're referred to as a Braida, it means you are pretty dangerous at this local game of handball. It's called stretch ball, if you actually translate it out. And Braida was somebody who was really good at handball. So Giacomo Bologna, and I'll talk about his history a little bit later, but the vineyard that he purchased was a vineyard called Brico De La Ucelione. You have the Montebruna, which is a slightly different wine. The Brico De La Ucelione is his Barbera aged in first and second used French barrique, 225 liter, for a period of 2 years, which is absolutely unheard of treating that grape in such a manner. That and a lot of vineyard practices having to do with trimming yield, making concentrated grapes and concentrated juice as a result. And in 1979, he released Brico De Ucelione. And I think it was a tremor in the Italian wine world, certainly in the Piemontese wine world, because very soon afterwards, names like Giacomo Conterno, Giuseppe Mascarello, Giuseppe Rinaldi, Bartolo Mascarello, these great Barolo producers started making beautiful Barbera, and they started aging it in French barrels. Some would age it in large barrels made of Eastern European oak, and that's what you have in the glass with the Monte Bruna. That's that producer taking a certain vineyard of Barbera grapes and putting it in large, towering barrique, large, towering casks known as botti, which I happen to have a certain love affair with. So after Brico De La Ucelione, I'll just mention one other, and then I'll turn the history over to Pietro. But one other producer by the name of, the name of the actual producer is Scarpa, a very special producer in Piemonte. He took his Barbera grapes, and instead of aging them in newer French oak barrels, he decided to age them and treat them like Barolo. And that was the other great release coming from the Barbera history. And the name of that particular wine is called Bogliona, a wine that I'll be featuring in my store, I hope, sometime soon. And it's a very famous Barbera, and a couple of my students here in this tasting have tasted 2008 Scarpa La Bogliona, and I tell you, it took the entire tasting. Out of all those wines I painstakingly sourced, that was the one that killed everyone. And I had a 96 for my 40th birthday in the past April. So it's a wine that I love. But that, after that, Barbera is subjected to the modern history that most others grapes are in Piemonte. And we can get into that at another time. Pietro, you want to jump in and take it from California? Yeah. I'm not sure what date you're starting.
1880.
See, I missed you. I overshot you right to 1980.
All right.
Take it away, good sir.
Yeah, California has been interested in Barbera for a long time, but it's not something that necessarily has always gelled for multiple reasons. The first planting of Barbera that we had was actually in Cupertino, down on the peninsula. A guy named John Doyle, who was going back and forth to Piemonte pretty regularly. He also was planting Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, and Fresia in Silicon Valley. During the 1880s, California was really going crazy as far as importing vines, test blocks, wineries were popping up everywhere. Certainly Napa, Sonoma County had started really going 1860s, 1870s, but by the 1880s, it was really rolling forward. The next point would be 1890, the Italian-Swiss colony up by Cloverdale in Asti, kind of in between Healdsburg and Cloverdale, became one of the biggest producers in the US of red wine. A lot of it was based on Sangiovese, but they had a good amount of Barbera plantings as well. And in good vintages, they would actually bottle varietally labeled Barbera and even some Nebbiolo from time to time. I've got a couple single-page reviews from I think it was the Royal London Wine Society reviewing all the wines. And the Barbera review sounded like Barbera: deep color, spicy, good acidity, bright, a little bit stinky, but in a good way. Like all the things that you would want from Barbera for the most part. The problem with Barbera, though, is that it is terroir sensitive, and growing conditions play a lot into how good the wine production is. It's very dependent on what you do in the vineyard with it. So there were lots of test plantings going on all around, and people were pretty enthusiastic about them. But there'd be a planting in Lodi that did horribly, and one up in the hills somewhere that was magnificent. And it was just responding very differently to different soils and different altitudes. So it never quite gained the reputation of being this amazing standalone grape. it was always sort of considered a blender because it had pretty good dark color. It had a good amount of acidity, so it could always be added to a low acid wine, something from Lodi or a warmer climate. Good alcohol, which a few Italian producers say you can't make good Barbera below 14%, and there's some truth to that. And it doesn't have a whole lot of tannin. So it's a unique grape in that way just to begin with, but it can also be used just as a blending 10-15% kind of thing. And that's sort of what it was relegated to up until Prohibition. There were maybe 5,000 acres at one point in the US, maybe around 1910, but a lot of that was in the Central Valley. The California wine industry was also really sort of becoming monolithic then. Wine was just produced everywhere, shipped to San Francisco, and then bottled and then shipped out. Just lots of big red jug blends, very little specific bottlings. And of course, when Prohibition happened, that was kind of the end of the story for a while with that. I read somewhere that Sebastiani actually had about 500 acres in Sonoma Valley right up until Prohibition also. But then the lights kind of go out. Krug in Napa Valley kept a couple small blocks of Barbera and would occasionally release a varietally labeled bottling. I think 1954 was the first year of that. So it would pop up here and there, but it really was just, this was the era of wines of style. They were claret style or red blend similar to a Burgundy, hardy Burgundy, those sort of things. It wasn't until the 1970s when California started kind of awakening from the wine slumber. You had a food revolution going on. People were traveling. Just our general wine and food consciousness was really starting to amp up. Amador County and the Sierra foothills kind of became ground zero for a little while. So Montevina and Dick Cooper up there in the 70s were planting Barbera. And Dick Cooper now has the oldest planting. I think it was 1976 was when he planted it. Old vines up at about 1,600 foot elevation on the other side of California, up in the foothills. And production still is not that huge. The one hiccup is that Gallo planted about 20,000 acres in the Central Valley in the 1980s and then gave up on it in about the 1990s. It was just a little too much work in the field to get it right. Kind of sticking with that theme that Barbera is a little bit finicky. It is a little bit unique. And now you're seeing it more frequently. There's great Barbera from Mendocino, Sonoma County. Segasio makes one that you can find from time to time. It's Safeway that's actually really good. Central Valley, Lodi makes some good Barbera. That's one of its virtues is holding acidity in warmer climates. It can actually be quite good. Down deep south, what's that area near San Diego? Temecula. Barbera is actually doing well down there also. It can take heat. It doesn't like scorching heat, but it's happy up to about 95, 97 degrees. It helps with that ripeness and that body and the color. So it's a grape that really is well suited to a lot of California in a remarkable way. It's just kind of a matter of plugging it into enough places and then giving it the care that it needs. And then the other part of that is that Barbera likes to be old vine. It can be really vigorous. So you're not going to get good Barbera until the vines are 20 years old. And that's a commitment of time and, thinking ahead for a period. So right at that point, that's where Barbera starts being really good. And most producers aren't necessarily thinking 25 years down the road, oh, this will be good then. And I'll start getting my investment back that way. So the business end of Barbera, you got to have a little bit of passion for it to really see it through. But the potential's always been there, and people always knew about it and talked about it. It's just about getting the fine points right. And California's getting much better with that.
So interesting.
And even with the modernization of Barbera, which kind of saved it in a way or gave it a second life, you could say, it was pretty parallel here in California as well. I mean, small barrels and that sort of Bordeaux, Burgundian technique, depending on how much you're working the grapes, it really does suit Barbera.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a wonderful wedding that sometimes that modern twist ruins things for a while. For Barbera, it probably improved it a bit.
Yeah, I think it put it out somewhere in the world as an expression of not just an everyday sipping wine, which was what Barbera was. I mean, there's
Yeah,
what Bolo producer doesn't make a Barbera? You know?
yeah, and
Yeah,
it can be, and that's fine. But it's nice to have your stainless everyday drinker, and then your old vine. You know, it's nice to know what the range of the grape is and the possibilities.
I agree.
Now, the more people are doing that, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Cool. All right, folks, should we get into the glass? We have any
Yeah, I
questions?
just have a quick question for
Yeah.
Pietro. How old are the vines, your Barbera vines in Lake County?
So we actually have 3 blocks, which is ridiculous because one of the blocks is only 200 vines large. But the oldest one was planted in 1999. The second block was 2000, and now you're really stretching my brain. 2005. Oh yeah, there's the map. 2005, and then the last thing I planted was 200 vines in 2013. And they're very different clones, and they act very differently from each other. All 3 are. If I told you in the next vintage we'll have all 3 clones finally in it because those 2013 vines are producing, and yeah, so E right there is the oldest block, and those that's really rocky soil, and those are really struggling, and that going back to the vineyard talk, those vines were the ones that were judged to be the worst in the Lodi trials in the 70s because they were super productive and super huge berries and lots of rot. Well, for us, they hardly produce anything. They have tiny berries and no rot potential. I don't do any crop thinning. This picture is of the second block, which is a very heavy producer, but it has a really, really strong sort of blackberry, boysenberry fruited component and a lot of sort of reductive earthy tones to it. So it makes a great sort of backbone to the wine. That old block is very pomegranate and bright and lifted. And then the new one is almost like Cab Franc. It's very floral, very peppery, lots of lavender stuff to it. So I'm putting all 3 together. I'm really excited to get the next vintage up and running and see how it goes. So we have a little bit of old vine, and we're starting to get a little more of that mineral sensation out of them, which is sort of the holy grail for me, is to start getting that length on the finish.
Yeah. Would everyone grab the glass of Prima Materia Barbera? Let's put that glass. If you have a white sheet of paper or something, would be great. The best way to examine the color of a wine is to tip the glass down so it's actually your head is reaching over it, and to let the wine splay out from the end of the glass to the tip. In this particular wine, can anyone see through that color? It's pretty opaque, yeah? I have a hard time seeing the writing on my page underneath it. Anyone else?
Nope.
I can't see anything.
Yeah, pretty opaque, huh? And that's not always the case. Certainly, if you look at like the Montemagno Barbera or the Monte Brugno Barbera, they're a little bit lighter in color. Pietro, if you want to talk a little about color in Barbera and how you see kind of that dark opacity and
that's one of its virtues. If you're a fan of the darker body sensation, the Barbera, it's a thin skin grape, but it's surprisingly dark in color. The coloring compounds, anthocyanins, things like that, they're really stable, abnormally stable in the wine world, and they're kind of like Cabernet in that way, where it just if it's grown right or grown in a place with abundant sunlight, you just get really stable color. And it'll 15-year-old Barbera still has pretty rich colors to it. I think for us, my fermentations are fairly long because I'm trying to move it more into an earthy space. And for me, that's one of the ways I approach that. but also we're at just about 1,500 feet. So you get a little more UV light with altitude. So the skins develop a little more thickness, and they sort of just naturally develop more coloring compounds as a way to shield themselves from the sun.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have a question about that actually. So just wondering, given the thin skins, are they more likely to, burn it if there's a heat spike or something?
it's more, as long as you're treating it right in the vineyard and don't have things touching too much, it's more a concern with rain. In-skin grapes,
Okay.
if you get rain like you often do in Europe or Italy, places unlike California,
Yeah.
and we've had rainy vintages with Barbera, it will rot at the drop of a hat.
Speaking from its expression in Italy, it's very susceptible to spring frosts, and a disease called fan leaf, which robs that grape. I don't know too much about fan leaf. Pietro, do you know about fan leaf?
It's not something I've had to deal with directly, so I'm not well versed on it.
Yeah,
but
I think
know
it robs the grape of photosynthesis.
Yeah, there's some grapes it can actually work with, but I think Barbera, it hits extra hard.
Yeah. Barbera and Piemonte likes pretty rich soils. I don't know how it is in California. It really loves the rich soils of Asti and like Tortona, and
we've got a lot of that.
Romagna and Sardinia, where it's grown. Believe it or not. In California, though, I mean, are your soils pretty rich? A simple question, I know.
yeah, it's complicated. So technically we are Forbesville soil, which is roughly 1/3 rock, 1/3 very fine volcanic sand, and then 1/3 clay. And then there are other things in there, obsidian and different clay types. Right. I would say the one challenge, and for Barbera, it's actually an asset. There's this weird inversion that happens where alkaline soils make very acidic grapes. So that all that limestone in France, and there's a lot of limestone in Italy also, tends to hold acidity. Acidic soils and volcanic soils are quite acidic. Ours are pretty acidic. Actually decrease acidity in grapes. So it helps. You'll probably notice when we taste the wines, you can probably feel a little bit of difference in the acid level.
Yeah, for sure.
Across from them. So it tempers that a little bit. And in other soil types, taming Barbera's acidity can be a bit of a challenge. You have to go.
So how big a challenge at 1,500 feet are you with frost, spring frost?
We got frost this year. Yeah. I think 2008 was our last bad frost. But Barbera, it buds out fairly early, and then you pick it fairly late. It's on the later end of the picking spectrum. And if you're at altitude, like last year, we got a lot of frost in October during pick time.
Wow.
Sometimes when grapes are hanging and they're close to ripe, if they freeze, a light frost is okay, but if the temperature really drops, you got to go in and pick them. So they'll start splitting, and the game is up at that point. So Barbera is a little bit timing sensitive for sure.
Right.
But in theory, places like Lake County, Mendocino County, it likes elevation. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing for it. And I think getting some hot days and some cool nights, that can be a good thing. Even though it can also take some warm nights as well. It's more flexible than Nebbiolo.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which depends on those diurnal shifts as much as possible.
Yeah, those are important.
Cool.
Can you also talk about, it was really funny to hear you say that it's stinky. Could you tell me a little bit more about like what that means?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting Barbera topics. And there's actually a theory that Barbera may be related to a Chinese grape that has, I forget what the compound is called. It's a specific sort of rubber smelling thing. Barbera is famous for reasons we're not totally sure of yet, for having sort of a burnt rubber smell occasionally, both in California and in the old world. It's just unique to it. But Barbera is, I probably have to explain this a little bit, but it's a reductive grape. So there are grapes that are prone to oxidation, and you want to protect them from the air and oxygen. because that affects their color and stability. Grenache is pretty oxidative. Pinot, it'll oxidize pretty easily in a lot of places. Barbera is the opposite. It actually loves oxygen. It sucks up a lot of it.
Too much.
Yeah. So with Barbera, there's this kind of knife edge that you're running with, where you need to give it a little bit of air as it's evolving to sort of keep those what are pleasant ways to say it. So it's a virtue. It's not a problem. The sort of stinky notes that some people call them swampy or a little bit rubbery or a little bit, those darker moist soil tones that can be a little bit much. That's the sort of reduction factor. I don't know if you smelled mine, but when I pulled the cork on it, it needed 15 minutes of air for the fruit to come out, for it to loosen up. It was a little bit stinky at first.
Yeah.
I thought it was barnyard.
That's the way it is.
Barnyard, and yeah, absolutely. There's also this kind of forest floor or like damp cellar smell that Barbera get. Yeah. It needs to blow off.
When I opened all three of them, I thought the last one was probably the mustiest in a way. Yeah.
So that's that. The Monte Bruno, they come from vines that were planted in the 1970s, in a vineyard that they had a hard time trying to kind of gather. But those grapes are treated very much like Barolo. So it spends, around 20 days on the skins, around the same amount of time as actually Pietro's that spends a few days more on the skins than the Braeta does. But it's the large Eastern European barrels that frame the natural aroma of Barbera really on its own. They give it like a little culinary herb thing going on, but French oak really shows up, like vanilla, baking spice, feel it on the palate. It's very, it's a loud expression in the wine, but the Slovenian barrel really leaves it bare. And that wine was also fermented. The fermentation, the yeasts were spontaneous, so they didn't inoculate it with cultured yeasts or anything. So you add all that together, and Rachel, it really it turns up those earthy tones on Barbera. Yeah. But I hope that, the earthiness, certainly with the Braeta, kind of dissipated just a little bit, and it kind of came around to like sweet baking spice and like dark plums and blackberries and things. I'm not sure if anyone else is having that experience with the Braeta.
For me, the Mysterium was the most kind of musty in that regime.
Yeah, got a little age to it too.
What's that?
Kind of jammy in a way, or kind of like, I do smell like plum.
It tastes jammy to me too, the Mysteria.
Yeah.
Mysteria. Yeah, that one's got some age to it. It's a 2015. And one thing I've noticed with Barbera, having it back to the, like the mid 1980s, is Barbera starts to show age pretty quickly. For me, I feel age pretty fast with Barbera. So I think
I'm not sure it gains a whole lot with extended aging. I mean, it's fun to drink, but
just the secondary aroma thing. But the grape has such nice natural acidity. I mean, it really it can live for a bit. I had a Bouillon, an 89 Bouillon, and that was like, man, that was good. Yeah.
Every other sip, I got a little raisin in the Prima.
From the Prima?
Yeah. 2017, it was a very tough year. We had more than double normal rainfall. It was my hardest year in the vineyard ever, just trying to keep vines under control and choke back and disease free. Yeah. But we had a lot of heat spikes. We had a lot of days hitting 100 and over 100, even late into the season. So, there's always that question, like, should I pick earlier and try to, prevent any sort of thing from happening, or do we sort of roll with the heat spikes and try to keep that being a part of the vintage, because most of the other fruit was looking great. It was balanced out and really felt pretty wonderful. So sometimes, yeah, I mean, sometimes you could pick a week earlier. Sometimes you could pick a week later. There are definitely decisions that you make that affect the final product.
Yeah.
I feel like this actually shows the vintage, though, which was a little bit challenging in a way that feels honest and transparent to me. Not necessarily perfect, but, you know, transparency is important with wine.
So I mentioned it because I attributed it to oxidation due to age, but you're saying that's not what it is. It's due to the heat and the extended time on the vine.
For mine, but
The raisin. To me,
Yeah,
to me, raisiny is like one of the things that comes up as a wine ages and oxidizes, and so that's why I contributed to the discussion at that time.
I got it.
But you went a different way, which is interesting to me. So you're saying it's like an Amarone or something like.
Well, I've definitely, you know, I think we've all probably had overripe Zinfandel that is oxidizing, just because the grapes, they're already sort of over the hill when they're being picked, so to speak. I'm not sure I get that sensation with this, but it's possible there's a little bit in there.
Yeah, you know, raisinated is a tough one in Italy because it really does speak of two very specific wines and one very specific production method. Making Amarone in the north east, and then making a Nebbiolo like that up in Valtellina called Sforzato. And then around the island, they use the raisinating process to make sweet wines and stuff. That's an interesting point that you make, Jeremy. Because I drink a fair amount of old wine, and I get raisiny characteristics. But for me, when I get raisin in a wine, it always makes me think that it's a hot vintage. That unless it's an Amarone, put that aside. But it always makes me think that it's kind of a hot vintage. And when I come across those characteristics in a little bit of an older wine, I'm just throwing my 2 cents in here, and understand all of you that wine is a sensory experience, and our tolerance and threshold are all different. So my raisin could be someone's blackberry, could be someone's pomegranate. I mean, who knows? And at the end of the day, who cares? As long as we find something that we enjoy in the wine. But just going back, when I get to older wines, I get less of raisin for raisin's sake, and I get more of fruit that has slowly integrated with the tannin, the alcohol, and the acidity, and that fruit moving more towards like being like cooked into a jam or a compote. Like the actual state of the fruit changes over time a little bit. And there's a point where that can be raisiny. I've had a Nebbiolo once from 1945, and it was raisins in the glass all day. And it was crazy wine, but it was that was like the penultimate that I found. Just as a thought, another dimension.
I appreciate that. That's great info.
I find that the Brita hot and alcoholic, which for me interferes with the taste. And in that respect, the Prima Materia I prefer. Is that in any way an objective observation, or is that just my subjective or even idiosyncratic reading of the two wines?
So I will I will add that in my tasting, I wrote down that I smelled more acetone and a slight acetone, and also tasted more alcohol from the Breda compared to the Prima Materia. But I will also say that sitting here and just having them in a glass and with some time, it really has actually changed over time. So with the Prima Materia, in the beginning, I smelled root, and or just kind of like stemness, root kind of, and then as it opened up, it really shifted over to like ripe cherries. And when I tasted it initially, the acids like lingered for a while, but then it softened and went away, and it turned into this like slight bitterness, which I like. And that has also kind of gone away to just more kind of, again, ripe cherries. So agreeing with Neil to say, yes, I taste more alcohol in Breda.
Anyone else feel that way as well? that Brieta is showing alcohol. I think the actual Brieta is a bit lower in alcohol, though I don't have the bottle in front of me. Pietro, will you check the ABV on the Brieta for me?
It claims 15%.
15?
Mm.
So it is more. Okay.
I thought, I love James's, I agreed with like every little detail he had.
Yeah, that was really good.
Like I was calling all those things. That was great.
Yeah, that was well said. I agree.
I will say that I think the Brieta, with mine in comparison, it's also a good example of larger format oak versus small barrels.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, if I had the opportunity to purchase some of those large format Botti, or concrete is actually the other thing I would love to have.
Yeah.
It kind of preserves the acidity and the primary fruit of the wine much better than smaller French barrels and barriques, which is something hopefully down the road I can get some larger format, because I do think that the small barrels, I think they're fine for a period of time, but sometimes, and mine are all neutral. Some of these barrels are 20 years old that I'm using, so they're not adding any oak flavoring to the wine, but they still expose it to a little more, there's a little more oxygen and maturing that's happening at an accelerated rate in the smaller barrels.
Sure.
So I think some of the purity that the Brieta has, I like. I kind of like, I'm wishing I had that. Give me that. It's a little more like primary fresh in the middle, in a way that I really find kind of savory and pretty and fun.
Yeah, I agree, Pietro, but I think your Barbera shows a lot of complexity in the glass. And I think the Montemagno also shows some complexity. For me, the Montemagno is just Asti. It's got Asti written all over it, just the way it tastes. And for me, Barbera always shows wild fruits, certainly. And that's kind of, that knob is turned to 11 when you're getting into Asti. But just back to the barrels that we were talking about, when it comes to making barrels, the smaller ones, the barrique that we're talking about, we're referring to, barrique is a French term for a particular sized barrel. And it can go anywhere from like 140 to up to just about 400 or 500. And those can all be kind of considered barrique. The one that you see the most often is a 225 liter barrel. And to make that particular type of barrel, you have to bend the staves using fire. And what that does is it toasts the inside of the barrel just by virtue of how it's made. And that toast always reaches like a medium, because it's about a 20-minute, it's like a 22, 23-minute process where you have the fire and you have your barrel. And I'm happy to put up a slideshow to show you guys, but you slowly close in the hoops on the bottom and it chars the inside of that barrel. And when that charring happens, it caramelizes the natural sugars that are inside that barrel, and that imparts onto the wine. So when you hear that a wine has been aged in French barrique, know that you're going to get, even if they've been used quite a number of times, and it'll be far less, you'll still get some kind of not to infect the wine, but it enhances the wine, so to speak. It gives it a little bit mid palate, because when it comes to the staves of charred oak, it gives off tannin. It also gives off aroma like vanilla and baking spice and things. But when you put a wine in a large barrel, those large barrels are not coopered together by fire. They're coopered together with steam over a long period of time. And when you cooper these large staves together by steam, you're not caramelizing anything. So when you actually get that barrel into the winery and you get wine in it after several power washings of water, those staves are much more innocuous. They're much more shy, and they won't show into the wine as much, despite them being from Eastern European oak, which I get more of a culinary herb thing, or French oak, which gives like a little bit of a sweet kiss of like sweet spice. But really hands off the wine. So that's kind of, when I chose the Brieta, I wanted a particular vineyard that was maybe a slightly older vineyard, but I wanted it in large barrels. And Pietro, did you know that the Brieta sits in glass-lined cement tanks that when it ferments? So
Oh no,
there's
no.
your comment.
Aha.
Yeah. Aha.
Yeah. Old school.
I had another question about when you had the map up, you talked a little bit about like where the pomegranate was and where the lavender was. I think that you were planting. Is that right, Pietro? In your map of like where you've planted all the different vines.
Mm-hmm.
So do you plant like different yeah, it was back this one, yeah.
Oh, I think I was just using descriptors.
Oh,
Sorry, that's one of those wine things.
oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't literally have lavender or pomegranate planted. I was just sort of
Oh,
characterizing the different fruit tones from the different blocks.
okay.
We have one pomegranate tree though.
Oh, cool. Because I was thinking about like how might planting different, fruit trees or, herb trees next to.
It does affect things. We know that some of the Napa Valley Cabernet with eucalyptus characteristics has good proximity to eucalyptus trees. There's even a new vinification method called flash détente, where they put grapes in basically a vacuum chamber. They sort of explode and then you ferment them. They've been, in experiments, they've been distilling off all of the compounds that are not indigenous to the grapes. There's this thing called terroir now instead of terroir. So they're in certain areas bringing grapes, and they're actually finding diesel exhaust here and, tomato pollen here and all sorts of other environmental factors are, stuff lands on grapes and becomes part of the process. So if you've got herbs growing in the rows, which I would like to do in some blocks, I think that's a really interesting thing. If you got lots of fennel growing up and down at the perimeter, that could have an interesting effect.
Yeah. Provençal rosé is undeniable herbs de Provence sometimes. It's undeniable in the glass. You're just like, wow, that is all those herbs mixed together, and they're grown in Provence, Yeah, it's interesting, Sydney. It's a little right now. There's not too much research out there from as far as I know. And I not too long ago I teach a class called Aroma, the art of aroma, and kind of where it all comes from. And it's like minerality. That smell of like after it rains in a parking lot or something, and that smell of minerals, or if you dive your hand into a babbling brook and come out with a little bit of moss and rocks and wet, and you smell that, you feel that. The smell of minerality in Chablis or Muscadet from the Western Loire, they still don't know how the wine gets that smell. And as far as research has taken us, they think that it's actual little flecks of rock mineral deposits, like making their way onto the grape.
Wow.
And which is not as sexy as I thought it would be, where like the roots of the vines were like all up in the ground. You're like taking on the characteristics of the soil. No, none of that stuff. So we still don't know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Those are contentious arguments too with what's happening below.
Absolutely.
That's a whole new exploratory scientific field with the mycorrhizal fungi and how they're communicating and things going across cell walls. That's sort of the next frontier.
Pietro, would you talk a little bit about the wildfire vintage, or the vintages that you've experienced?
The wildfire vintages?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How has that shown up in the winemaking? Fires going on all around in Northern California.
Yeah. Another area with a lot of research going on. I actually send lab reports to UC Davis to be part of a large database that they're collecting, specifically from the 2018 Lake County fire. There have been lots of other fires too in other counties, so there's a large repository happening. But fires are interesting. What's starting to congeal knowledge-wise is that proximity to the fire for all the volatile things that are being released is a big factor. What is burning is a hugely important factor. So different trees, are these houses, you know, the horrible Paradise fire where leather sofas are going up compared to the Lake County fire where no homes burned. Very different molecules in the atmosphere. And then there are differences in where air settles and altitude. And is it a windy area versus, you know, like a valley floor where things are sort of collecting? One of the weirdest things I've experienced is just that from having been in some of these areas and through some of the, like the 2017 Sonoma County fire, the Santa Rosa fire, I've actually been able to taste a couple other people's wines, and they'll sort of remind me of what I smelled driving through the area during the event. So there is, you know, sort of an immediacy that the wine can capture of that, which is crazy. So that's the existential side. The reality of it is that there are fires from other places and smoke will blow into, you know, a grape growing area pretty often over the last 10 years. And low level, I mean, we're talking parts per billion here, because actually humans are super sensitive to a lot of the compounds in fires. So a part per billion is one drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And the threshold where where 50% of the population can recognize smoke taint is 6 drops in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So we're very attuned to that. But lots of wines have just a sub-threshold level of environmental taint from other things over the last 10 years pretty commonly. There have been lots of fires in LA as well. You know, Santa Barbara area, Paso will be in smoke for a few days. There's a certain amount that grapes can, that the wine can handle and we won't notice it. But grapes are peculiar though, if there is really strong, you know, in the immediate proximity, the grape skins will sort of grab onto the molecules and then they take them inside and the sugars bond to them. Right. For some reason, grapes, the way they've evolved, they're not trained to deal with fire. It sets off another mechanism inside of them. They actually hold on to the compounds. And then over time, after you make the wine in the acidic solution, the compounds start breaking apart. Yeah. And then you start getting smoke taint. So we have to be really cautious with vintages that have more than just a small amount of smoke exposure. And finally, there's science that I've sent things to lab, got back, you know, this is at 6 parts per billion. It's like, okay, well, 8 is the threshold. I will go non-vintage on this, dilute it down to 3. I feel that's safe. Yeah. And, you know, we can finally sort of look at numbers and make an educated guess as to what's going to happen. But some grapes, like Petit Verdot and Mourvèdre, will grab onto 20 times the amount of smoke compounds as Cabernet, for example. There's just something about the cuticle of the grape and what it does. The scientists don't know why that is. So for the same amount of smoke exposure, if you have 20 different grapes planted in your vineyard, you could have 20 different levels all over the board. And then they're all going to hold it differently too. You can probably get away with more smoke in Cabernet than you can Pinot Noir. Pretty sure of that.
Makes me think of Norello Mascalese and Etna.
Yeah.
How resistant that little grape must be.
Yeah. Again, you know, it's these environmental things, they're such an interesting topic. Like, as a winemaker, like, where is the cutoff between saying this is faulty or saying that this is just a vintage, it happened, I don't know, it'll be fine. You know, there's some level of responsibility in there between the two poles. Yeah. Just like a chef would need to execute some sort of like, this is okay, this is not okay, this is not what we do here. You know, they're interesting questions for sure. Sure. So fortunately, in 2018, Lake County had over 300,000 acres burn. It was a huge fire. It was mostly out in the wilderness. I watched it from where we were crawl all the way around the lake to the other side. I have videos of just, you know, the tankers just bombing the heck out of it. It was wild. But because it was pretty much 2 miles away at all times, it had this sort of old smoke smell, not like fresh trees burning. There's a lot of juniper and things like that that are really aromatic that I was a little concerned about. But the way the wind patterns worked, at least for a lot of Lake County, it actually sort of moved things away. And a lot of people escaped what we were sure was going to be a damaged vintage. So I do know a guy who grows more veg by the lake. That's I wouldn't bottle that. But those are kind of outliers. So it's, yeah, the fire topic is something the Australians are actually leading in the science right now with it, because they have a lot of fires down there.
Yeah.
That do affect those things. So they actually are the scientific spearhead right now with that. So,
wow.
Yeah, and there isn't any good remediation. You can't just add something to the wine and pull it out.
Yeah.
If you have actual smoke taint, it's very pervasive.
Yeah.
So deciding where your cutoff is, or just, you know, a lot of winemakers in 2018 just didn't make wine.
Yeah.
The grapes were insured. We have a claim. Just write it off. Yeah, not a fun topic, but a very interesting topic.
We're not going to end on that. Any other thoughts out there? Questions about Barbera?
So I was surprised. I was surprised. To me, the Mysterium is like medium, maybe even medium plus tannin. I think of this as a lower tannin grape. Yeah, I think you said that.
Actually,
but I got a fair amount of tannin in it.
Yeah,
that's one thing I was going to mention. Even though we talk about Barbera as being fairly low tannin, just a couple things from my own observations. Like with the longer fermentations that I do, you start getting back palate tannin coming up, a little bit of that gritty sort of almost Petit Syrah type tannin. That's something that I like, just to kind of frame it. But Barbera does have tannin, and it can have an extra seed in each grape. Most grapes have only 2 seeds. Some have only 1. Barbera often has 3 seeds in each grape. And I've noticed towards the end of fermentations, if the fermentations go long, you can actually get a pretty good tannic buildup depending on the clone that you have. And I think if you have those additional seeds in there.
But the seeds and skins are in the fermentation when you're talking about this, or not?
Yeah, skins and seeds are both in there.
Okay.
Paul, do you know how long what the fermentation practices were like on that one?
For this particular one, 20 days. Everything was removed, so they've got no stems or anything like that. But the seeds are inside the grapes. I'd imagine they're hanging on.
So we're all running about equal fermentation.
Yeah, they do a submerged cap fermentation.
Oh,
so okay. All the skins and everything all together, and they submerge it. It's called Acapello Sommerso, and it's a type of fermentation that Bartolo Mascarello, a great Barolo producer in Piemonte, he's the one who coined that. But it really gives you a full. A lot of producers there'll be like a covering on top of the fermentation. And Pietro, please jump in if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
They either do a pump over, so they're literally pumping like the juice over on top, or they'll do a punch down, where they're literally like punch it down with like big sticks or however they do it. Or you can do the sommerso, and there are some other ways to do it as well.
Yeah, so that would definitely
maximum extraction. Jeremy. Yeah.
That's like full on, full bore style.
Yeah. Cool. And the Mysterium is aged in a very wide range of different barrels, from barrique that actually go a bit smaller than 225, all the way up to 1,200 liter and big ones. So when a winery tells me that, it usually means we do it different year in, year out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's smart with Barbera though.
I think so too.
It responds differently.
I think the tannin, I've always found Barbera to have tannin, but not like Cab or not like Sangiovese even either. But to have tannin like as a part of it. But I think Barbera takes on the characteristics of those large barrels a bit more than Nebbiolo does. I don't know how that happens or why. I always study barrels and I have an affinity for them, and it's a challenge. It's a fun challenge for me to be able to blind a wine and figure out what barrel it's sat in. And there's just something about those with Barbera. I never get the aromas of Eastern European wood in any other wine like I do in Barbera. It's like right there for me. In Nebbiolo, like I have to find it. It's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Barbera is receptive in some
weird,
like positively receptive, not negatively, not like, I'm trying to think of something else. Like Sangiovese is very easily over oaked. It's a sponge. You have to be careful. You can totally squash it and deform it with oak. But Barbera is just, it acts very differently.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
It has good color. I think the color must help. The pigment must help. I mean, Angelo Gaia, one of the great practitioners of Nebbiolo, Gaia, G-A-Y-A, or G-A-J-A, excuse me. He makes Barbaresco in the town of Barbaresco in the Langhe. But his wines, he for the most part likes to actually. I don't know what he's doing now, to be honest with you, but he used to for years and years blend between 3 and 5% of Barbera into his Barbaresco and Barolo, and you can't do that. So his wines were always IGT, Indicazione Geografica Tipica, which is that designation that's slightly below DOC that allows for you to blend in grapes to monovarietal areas. But anyway. Yeah, so the color I feel like must have something to do with it as well.
And there are a few areas too where you what is it? Sometimes you'll see Fresia and up to the north that will blend in a couple % of other things with Nebbiolo.
Yeah,
and I've had a couple experiments myself. Just I have this bin holds about 2 barrels. What happens if I dump in 5 gallons of this? And 1 or 2% can be a nice kind of fill in, but Nebbiolo, it seems like it's very easily eclipsed also by other things, or deformed, I should say.
Deformed, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
I can't explain why, because you would think, oh, it's color deficient, it has too much tannin, it has too much acid. It would readily accept a couple blenders to tame it, but it has this delicate soul that's easily crushed.
Wow. Well, I like that. That's true. It has a delicate soul. I agree. Yeah, but I think both grapes are transparent grapes. They're grapes that really show where they're grown. And if you look at Piedmont, you can get Barbera from Asti, which is the home, and that Barbera has got so much varietal personality in the glass. All the fruits are wild and they're bright and they're almost spicy. And then you go to the neighbors in Alba and you get a much more tame version that has a much more mid-palate to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to an area called Tortona, which is eastern Piemonte, where a great white native grape by the name of Timorasso is grown. And Barbera is like a drop in the bucket. It's like this dark, like black fruit that just rounds out the center of your palate, and it almost sends the sides of your palate kind of in on each other. It can be a real kind of Luden massacre on your palate, but they also can be quite good. So Barbera runs the whole gamut. Have you ever had a sparkling Barbera, Pietro?
Yes, I have. I keep trying to remember that one to tell you about. Loved it.
There's a pairing in Piemonte that I was wildly skeptical of until I tasted it. But there's a dish by the name goes by the name of bagna cauda, and it's a dish where you boil olive oil with anchovy and salt and pepper, and then you take fresh, hearty vegetables, uncooked vegetables like tardivo and cauliflower and all this stuff, and you bathe it in this olive oil that should be almost to the point of bubbling because you have a little candle under it, and you eat that, and it's the pairing is sparkling Barbera. And for me, it's like, no way. Like, are you kidding me? I want Prosecco. I want something to like clean the anchovy, oil, salt, but I had sparkling Barbera with it, and it was awesome. There was something about it calibrating the whole thing. It was like all that like saltiness and brine and sharp acidity was like neutralized. It was really.
To me, that sounds like it actually makes so much sense, because when I think of sparkling wine as sort of having a prickly texture, and I mean from the air of it, and so it kind of brings out or kind of picks up on the sort of things that might be slightly lighter and in an element. And so what you described sounded heavy, but it's still not meat, and it's still not sort of animal fat, right? So it makes sense to sort of that the light oil, because it's also not a sort of it's not an oil that really heats up. And so in terms of olive oil, like when you're cooking and where you're frying food or whatever, like other oils heat up more than olive oil.
Yeah, like grapeseed oil. Yeah, they heat up quite a bit more. Yeah, olive oil only reaches a certain temp.
So it actually sounds like, even though it's like hearty vegetables, but it's still kind of this medium range of textures and flavors that gets brought out from the sparkliness of the wine texture itself.
Absolutely. You know, James, part of me was conceptualizing that, but the anchovy, I couldn't get past the anchovy. I didn't know, like my brain as a restaurant somm couldn't get past that. And I was known for, serving sparkling Saignée rosé from Champagne with 28-day dry-aged ribeye. You know, I'm willing to push it, but yeah. But it works. So you have a much better brain than I.
That dish sounds like it's a different kind of fondue in a way. You know,
it is.
the way you.
When I first had it, Rachel, I was in the little town of Castel Alfero, which is just north of the town of Asti. And I had requested that a grandmother make it for me. And when I requested this in my broken Italiano, she looked at me and she asked me, she said, "Are you taking the plane tomorrow?" In Italian, and I looked at her and I said, "No, I'm leaving the day after tomorrow." And she said, "Okay, you're all right then." And went to make the dish, meaning she didn't want me on a plane seated next to anybody breathing. Anyway, yeah, it's a great dish. I urge you to try and make it. It's not complicated at all. Just get good olive oil. Get Tuscan olive oil. Or
what's the name again?
It's called Bagna Cauda. Actually, if you receive the Monte Brune from me or the Mysterium from me on the card, I actually wrote it on the card under the.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
It looks like Bagna Cauda, and I'll write it in as well. Yeah. Bagna Cauda. It's a crazy one, but it's fun if you have a lot of people, you know, because you're all kind of digging in, and then you all smell each other's breath, and nobody wants that. It's good stuff. Pietro, what would
Can
you
I ask a question?
Your Barbera? Oh, please, of course. Go ahead.
Ask a question?
No, I'm going to shut
Pietro,
up.
can you tell us more about the Amador County Barberas?
Yeah, Amador County, it's actually kind of similar to Lake County, but just they're closer to a big, huge mountain range. So they have elevation too. They're hot in the summer, cold in the winter. Lots of similar iron-rich red soil, very rocky. Their growing season is shorter. So one thing about their Barberas, our growing season is, we can usually pick into the beginning of November safely. That's not quite the case in Amador. Oftentimes the Amador Barberas, depending on what the winemaker does, but they generally have pretty tart acidity. They're pretty bright and pretty peppery as well. Sometimes when you get up into some of the areas with the granite soil, that keep going up into the mountain range, you can find, like 2,500 feet, 2,700 feet on decomposing granite, and you can actually get really minerally, actually kind of going back to that raisin thing, you get that sense of like really bright acid and stony, peppery, but at the same moment, like sun drenched. Like you can tell that these grapes are getting a lot of sun. They're not raisins, but there's definitely that sort of like ripe outside, but still fresh inside going on. So I think it's a really interesting area. I will, just as a side note, since we mentioned Nebbiolo, the best California Nebbiolo I've ever had was grown at about 3,100 feet in El Dorado County on granite. And I think it was in 2004 that the guy opened up, and it was like the best Barbaresco I'd ever had. It was just
Really?
singing, just mineral, long, beautiful, angular but polished, just all these really, yeah, and an area again that just, but it's
not known for those characteristics at all.
Yeah, and I had one from another vintage that was just like, oh man, you should have picked these 2 weeks ago. I think when you start getting up into those sort of altitudes and growing conditions, vintage makes a lot of difference. It's a much more compressed window of getting things just right.
Yeah.
But yeah, Amador County Barbera is the one thing I would say. There are, I think, 100 different. If you go to the Barbera Festival, which was running, I think there were 120 at last count, different California Barberas, and a lot of those were from Amador County. And the winemaking is going to be all over the board. There's going to be a lot of new oak used in some of those. So if you like that, there's definitely an opportunity for that. If you're looking for lower oak usage, you may have to dig around a bit to find that. But it's there, and you know that they have access to older vines is very exciting, for sure.
Can you name some producers that come to mind?
I know in Oakland, well, I guess not Oakland anymore, but Alameda now, Urban Legend was making Barbera from Dick Cooper's vineyard for a couple of vintages. Who comes to mind? Bjornson. Cooper Ranch does make their own wine as well, and that's worth checking out. If you like the more oaky profile, then Jeff Runquist does more of that California big bold thing, which can be really fun too. Another person up there, Bill Easton, who's been making wines up there for a couple decades now. I think he has an Amador and then his own vineyard under Terra Rouge. Great winemaker, great wines across the board. Great Rhones also, if you want like
good Syrah.
Yeah, I was just going to say Syrah, and also really good, Roussan, Viognier, things like that.
Cool.
So, yeah, Bill Easton's wines and Terra Rouge, I think those are really, really excellent.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm blanking on names of producers that I would recommend too, of course. So
if you think of any, send them to Paul.
Okay.
Can forward.
Then we'll get it 3 weeks later.
That's okay. Better late than never, right?
Yeah.
That's my policy.
So what else? What else about Barbera?
We're going to talk about the wines any further, or?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we dug into materia a little bit. Should we play around with Montemagno? How many people have Montemagno in the glass? Just a few of you? Nice. Jeremy, I know you do. Mary's got it. Cool. Should we go through the Montemagno real quick? Ross, you don't have that one, do you?
I have it, but I haven't opened it, so I'm out of this particular round. Please share.
Don't worry about it. We'll go through a quick sensory evaluation of the Montemagno. This particular wine, I tasted this with a guy by the name of Andre Cherio, and since he must have emailed the winery because they're very Montemagno is very keen on receiving this video file from me and us talking about their wine. So everyone wave at Montemagno. Hi, Montemagno. Good. Well, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name in the right way. I'll hear about it if I don't. But yeah, you know, I chose this wine because it reminded me specifically of Asti and of having gnocchi con pomodoro at a very specific place in Asti. And there's just something about the smell and the flavor of the Barbera from that area. The way it has kind of a boisterous acidity and like all these wild fruits to it, and it's very clean. And this one's got some age to it, which I thought was fun. It changes the aromatic profile of it just a little bit. But in the glass, as you can see with the color, it's pretty light in color. It's not too much like Prima Materias or even the Braida. This one is a much different extraction. I believe they spend about 20 days on the skins, and then are transferred for aging in mid to large barrels. There's definitely, I see a little bit of evidence of age as I look into the glass. It's got kind of, you know, it's almost like a very kind of a light, I don't know, cherry ruby color. But on the outsides, it gets a touch into the yellow. And I see a bit of rim variation as I look kind of as it moves towards the middle, it gets a little bit darker. And typically when I look at wines like that, that tells me a little bit of age already in the glass. It moves in the glass really clean. I don't have a big, thick legs coming down in this glass. They're rather thin and small, so it tells me the alcohol's a little bit on the lighter end. Anyone want
to see slight amber color, like slight amber color around the edges?
Just a little bit, yeah. And that's when, you know, when wines have a little bit of age to it. And this is only 2015, so we're only talking 5 years, but it gives a little bit of that yellow and it starts to recede a little bit. And that's in old Nebbiolo going back, you know, 50, 60, 70 years, turns into like a red onion skin almost. So it's very, very pale. Some Sangioveses, as they get older, like Brunello from the 50s, that can get to be a very kind of like a orange with bright yellow highlights and a little bit darker brown in the center. It can get really interesting. But yeah, those colors all change pretty heavy. So if, for those of you that have the Mysterium in the glass, you know, when I think about, you know, what's in the glass and what I try and find, I always think, you know, red, blue, black fruits, and then I try and figure out the state of them. Does anyone want to chime in with some smells that they're getting?
I can go.
Yeah, please.
I got a little ripe black fruit, but I thought that was kind of secondary to me. Echoing what James said earlier, this was one of the two that I got some broken vine. It wasn't like classic pyrazine broken vine. I'm not sure. It's like just something green though.
Something green?
This was also the mustiest for me. It had a little forest floor earthiness, and then this was the most, when I say minerally, like, I mean like stone as opposed to other kind of earthy components. So this had the most kind of stone component to me of the three. So those were, to me, the greenness, the mustiness, and the stone were stronger than the fruit.
Yeah, I think the secondary aromas certainly shine in this. And I agree with Jeremy, there's a green note. I also got a green note in Pietro's wine as well.
Yeah,
just a little hint of it, but it's much more prettier, more like tarragon in here. Whereas in Pietro's, to me, it's like darker. It's got like a rosemary thing going. But yeah, I totally agree. Secondary aromas, the tertiary aromas, evidence of earth, oak, spice, things like that, really show on this wine. Anyone else before we get to the palate? Anyone else have any thoughts similar or different from Jeremy? Well, fine. We're going to go to the palate then. To me, you know, when it comes to Barbera d'Asti, and this one here, I think the nose is fine, and it's to me it's pretty, but it's really where the palate is where I like this wine. To me, it's got a nice, firm, medium body. The tannins are kind of medium on their way to plus, but not quite there, and they're very kind of tight knit and wrap themselves around my tongue. It's got super bright acidity, just kind of rushing off my palate. And I get this, I always get a finish of like rhubarb and cranberry skin or something when I taste Barbera from Asti. And sometimes it can have like a clipped finish, like it seizes up your palate a little bit. which is where I think the bagna cauda comes in, to be honest with you, to you know, soak that up. But this one has a rather smooth finish to it, and I like it. I think there's a lot in the glass here, personally. Any other thoughts on the palate? Jeremy, you want to jump in here? I know you got something written down.
Yeah, I mean, I called it medium plus acid. I called it medium alcohol. I called it medium plus tannin, as I think I said before. Yeah, but I agree with everything that you said, you know, except for some subtle like differences in degree.
Yeah, it doesn't have a particularly long finish. It kind of finishes a little bit short.
Yeah.
I kind of want skirt steak with it. But that's just me.
A little skirt steak, I like that.
Just a little, yeah. Certainly, out of the three, it's on the lighter side. I think the other ones eclipse it, just more on the palate and the weight. Yeah, Tenuta Montemagno. Any other thoughts on that wine, or should we move to hopscotch over to the Braida? Braida it is. All right, I don't have Braida in front of me. I tasted it over the last couple of days. And those of you that enjoy the Braida, I recommend that you leave a little bit in the bottle for tomorrow. The wine will have a much different expression with a day. And it's a good kind of window. Nice job, Ross. Thank you, sir. It's a good window into kind of the integrity of the wine, and certainly Italian wines can live a little bit longer, I think. The ones from the north. Pietro, what do you think about that?
I think that's probably right. Yeah.
Nebbiolo, Barbera,
with one or two exceptions, you know, Ionico.
Yeah, it doesn't live so much yet. Yeah. Cool. So let's have someone else talk a little bit about the color and the nose. Anyone want to read some thoughts when they first tasted this wine? Daniel and Amy, I see a pad with there must be writing on that pad.
Hey, can I just ask a question?
You may.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're drinking and we're having kind of fun, but which wine?
Is that secret for we're not paying attention?
Which wine are we talking about? And then I'm going to mute myself. Thank you.
What was I'm sorry, I missed the question, Dana.
Which wine are we talking about?
We're talking about the Braida. It says Monte Brune on the label. Marker label.
Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. No worries. I'm gonna go over to that house. All right, someone talk a little bit about the Braida. Give me an opinion. Give me something.
All right, Paul.
Yes, my dear. Mary.
Well, yeah, this is just out of my old head. But when excuse me, when I started off, I did what you said. I decanted the Braida.
Yeah.
So it's been sitting here since.
No, you decanted the Mysterium.
I'm sorry, the Mysterium. That's the Montemagno. Sorry, I'm sorry. I decanted that at 5 o'clock. So it was really interesting from the beginning, at least for me. And then I decided to open all the other bottles and just leave them in the bottle.
Okay.
So at first I didn't get a lot from Prima Materia. I didn't get an awful lot from the, what's the second one? The Monte Bruno.
Mm-hmm.
But as everything has been sitting here, it has been really interesting to get the changes that have gone on. And I've sort of been mildly working my way through them with a little antipasti here. And I have to say the bottom end is that I'm coming out with, I really am enjoying Prima Materia. And I'm really enjoying the Braida. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the Braida will taste like tomorrow. But to me, what has been fascinating is just the way things have changed over time and with air.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You know, it makes me,
a bit of food.
Mary, it makes me think of a little bit back in my restaurant days when we would receive, you know, a few cases of a wine or a pallet, you know, a tremendous amount of a single wine, and we would have tasted it. And it just, certainly coming off the ship from Italy, and it just didn't feel like it needed just a little bit of time. And so we'd go back 2 months later and taste it again, and it will have settled down a little bit. And what you're talking about is different. You're talking about something that's been sitting in a decanter and evolving with a lot of air.
Yeah.
And what I'm talking about is kind of the micro-oxygenation of a wine through cork. Pietro, how many vintages of Barbera have you made?
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that. Not that many, but we are at 12.
12. Well, that's a lot to me.
I would say the first couple I didn't know what I was doing, though.
Yeah, well, that and I admire that. So, and I know you taste the wines, Pietro. I know you taste them often in the tasting room and stuff. Tell me about Barbera. After bottling it and then tasting it, and then maybe, I don't know, 6-8 months down the road or something like that, and tasting it. How has it shifted and changed for you?
Yeah, Barbera is one that it goes through a lot of contortions after you bottle it. I think it's kind of similar to Syrah in that way. It will get very stinky, very closed down. The acid becomes really disjointed for a while. For ours, and we hand bottle these, so it's not like we have a high-speed, high-tech bottling line. It's a little more work. That's part of that reductive quality. I sort of intentionally push the wines in that direction so they can absorb a little extra oxygen in bottling. You have a couple old guys doing the wine. Yeah, Barbera really does go through an evolution period. And I think tannic grapes do also. Ionico can go crazy after you bottle it for a year. But the Barbera definitely needs to come together, and for that acid to settle and the little bit of tannin that's there to really integrate, and then the fruit to come back.
Yeah, I agree. And that acid with Barbera, you know, to me, acid, there are different types of acidity in the winemaking process. For me, acid presents itself very differently across different wines.
Yeah.
You know, tasting, you know, white from Roero, Arnais, and tasting an Albarino, and tasting a Chablis, and tasting, you know, a Chenin Blanc from Clarksburg. You know, all the acidity is just a very different thing in each of those wines. And for me, Barbera, it carries it, but it also kind of changes sometimes for me. When I taste Barbera, it's got kind of an added dimension, because some of the acidity can be like really rough and taut and kind of harsh, or sometimes it can be soft and pretty and just lightly put its hands on you. For me, the Barbera acidity is a rougher acidity, whereas the Montemagno in yours is a little bit of a lighter style, and it leaves my finish is a little bit nicer with those wines.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else experienced that.
Good way to put it.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
I guess I'm not quite tracking with the rough acidity. Like, can you relate that to like volatile acidity versus what some people call as like hard or like?
Yeah. So there's VA, which can be, you know, at varying degrees, you know, how you look at it. It can be good or it can be really bad. I'm not a big fan of a lot of VA in my wines. Volatile acidity, that's different. That's a flaw or potential flaw in wine, and that feels on my palate like it's engineered. When I'm talking about the acidity that I'm talking about is the way it presents in certain grapes, and then when I taste it on the palate. So for me, like going to Rias Baixas and tasting Albarino is a very dry acidity. It's like arid acidity. It just runs across my palate. It's very, very, very dry acidity. Whereas if I taste a white from like Sancerre or even further in the Loire Valley, the acidity tends to be a little bit softer and prettier. Barbera d'Asti has a very rough acidity to me. It kind of jumps on my palate. Like the fruit tends to dance a little bit. I'm not talking about physically like prickly dancing like volatile acidity can feel. I just mean when I swish it around my palate and I swallow, that finish how strong is that acidity, that mouth-watering feeling I'm getting. And sometimes it's soft and it's so pretty and well integrated. Like the Montemagno has that pretty integrated feeling. But sometimes it's rough and choppy, Jeremy, and just kind of, it feels like it's a little bit too harsh on the palate, and I want to eat some food. So I'm speaking in half measures a little bit, more perception kind of a thing, not hardcore science. But for me, there's different grapes carry different types of acidity.
So thank you for that's super interesting, because I literally just typed and also was writing that prickly, mouth-watering, and sort of lingering acidity that was sort of the way I feel it is that it's activating the taste buds that are in, like the textures that are in my tongue, that it's activating them. And so for the Breda, it's actually a little hard to have it by itself. I mean, it's fine and it's delicious, but I feel like I would enjoy it more if I was pairing it with different kinds of foods to sort of get different experiences out of that.
Yeah, I agree. And one area of wines that I particularly pay attention to the acidity is champagne, because most champagnes are dosaged with a mixture of sugar and a little bit of bacteria and some dry wine, whatever they use in their dosage. But getting the right dosage in a wine is not getting the right. It's like this perfect dryness where I don't feel the sugar, but the acidity is just so soft and perfect. Just kind of runs off my palate like Ruignard Blanc de Blanc, you know. That's a very kind of the soft, pretty acidity to me. Champagne was, I think, the opening for me when it comes to enjoying the dimensions of acidity. James, I just want to say is prickliness. Prickliness reminds me a little bit of alcohol. That's the only thing that prickliness, I move away from acidity and I get more towards the heat of alcohol.
I think for me, the prickliness and acidity is more as if you're thinking about taking a grape and peeling the skin and then licking the inside of the skin. And that's what I mean. That's how I'm tasting acid and prickliness.
That's good.
Inside of the that's good. I got to ruminate on that a little bit. Very cool. Any other thoughts out there? I see a hand up. No? No? Okay.
I mean, I'll throw in, like, I had written down caramel diketone when we tasted this, and then you told the story about the charring of the oak. I thought that was really interesting. To me, I come from more of a beer tasting background, and so we think a lot about diketones as a kind of fermentation byproduct. So it really, the caramel that I got really, I just put down to fermentation right away. But now I'm torn what to think after you told your story about the charring of the oak.
Which wine are you referring to, Jeremy?
The Breda.
The Breda. Yeah. I wonder if I go to that winery. So very often, like, you know, you'll see like you'll see on a web page or get to know a producer, and they'll say, like, you know, this is what we do. You know, we have all large old barrels. And it's like, oh, great, you taste the wine. It's like, wow, so much expression. And then you go there and you see the large barrels, but you also see 4 barriques off to the side. And you say, I thought you just did large barrels. And they're like, no. That's just to hold wine for something else. So sometimes I wonder, Breda, that's a lot of carrot. I also get that in the Breda. And I wonder if they're using some smaller barrels there. Because they do say they use mostly large. But yeah. You know, it's that caramelizing can really come off an American oak. Do you drink Rioja, Jeremy?
I hate oak, so I don't drink any Rioja.
You don't drink Rioja, got you. Well, for anyone that drinks Rioja, that's where American oak shows up, and it's the loudest of the 3 oaks, French, Eastern European, and American. And that's where it really is strong. And for me, I don't know if American oak belongs too much with Vitis vinifera. I think it belongs maybe a bit more for distillants. But Pietro, what are your thoughts on American oak versus French?
I think that's a conversation between you and Paul Draper, unfortunately. I don't have a lot of firsthand experience. I do know that coopers have become much more refined with American oak. and that there's a lot of regional sourcing going on now from Missouri, Appalachian. I know there are producers in Oregon using Oregon oak. So I think there's a learning curve involved with it. I do know that with my older barrels, I've got some American oak barrels that are 20 years old, and they do start kind of yielding a little bit of a strange dill pickle element, which is a little bit odd. I'm not a super fan of it.
Unnerving.
But well, I think producers who know how to use oak they're working with varietals that are really friendly with oak, and there's a certain sort of preparing the wine to accept the oak process. They can do really well with it. That's just not something I have firsthand experience with. I'm actually really oak sensitive, and
me too.
Yeah, and this is just focused more on varietal typicity, so it's just not something I play with very often. And when I have played with it, I've felt like I don't know what I'm doing to really effectively use it. So I'm kind of in awe of what Napa can do with oak and some of the other areas. It's an art form unto itself.
It is, folks. When it comes to oak and the innovations that Pietro was alluding to, French forestry laws go back to the 1600s. It takes roughly in the French forest departments of Allier and Cher and the other ones that run through central France, through the Loire Valley, with Champagne above and Burgundy below. Those trees have to be around 225 to 230 years old before they can be felled. Proper oak for barrels, it takes time. You don't just fell a tree and run a saw through it and create a barrel. The French are very particular about this, and there's a whole class or classification of French forestry folk known as Mérondiers, and they're the ones that go around and they choose the trees that they think are going to be excellent for barrels and go through the auction systems. Nowadays, right next to reps from Restoration Hardware and all that stuff, I'm sure. But these Mérondiers, they believe that when you fell a tree and you get ready for the process of making staves, that the natural veins of the wood need to be considered. For the longest time here in America, we would take a chainsaw through oak, cutting directly across the natural veins of the fibers of the oak. And the French taught us to split the oak, not so much by hand, and back in the day it was by hand, but a lot by mortar and axe. But to be able to split with a splitter, to choose this oak this piece of trunk correctly, to have the splitter hit at just the right area where it can split down through the natural fibers and veins and then split apart. And I've watched this process happen, and you really do. The smell is very different. I've smelled the piece of oak that's been sawed through, and it's a different smell than when it's been split by hand. And then, once it's milled together into staves, they will take those staves and they'll put them out in aging yards where they age for 3 years outside. That's 4 seasons. So that's winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, so on and so forth. Snow, rain, hail, bird shit, all of it. And every couple of months, they'll come in with these big forklifts and they'll take the stacks and they'll move them around in the aging yard. So all these wonderful, beautiful brown, pearly brown wood turns into this gray color. But what it does is it's seasoning that wood and softening those aromas of that wood so that when you finally cooper them together into barrels, they're not going to impart the ever-loving everything onto wines. And I think in the United States, we've back in the day, that was not the case. But now I think cooperages know what they're doing, and they're aging their staves out in the forest for a long time before they cooper them. Which is much better for wine barrels, and it's essentially what Pietro is trying to do with his inert barrels. He's in some of his barrel regimen, and I won't speak too much, Pietro. I'll let you take over, but he uses a mixture of some second and third and some neutral barrels. The idea is that you want to provide a broad range different aromas and different vessels for your wine, so you can give it complexity.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, a third-year barrel, and we talk about, you know, a vintage being in a barrel. Barrels can be very powerful the first year. There's a lot of vanilla and pepper and spices in there. And then they sort of deplete as time goes on. And effectively by the fourth or fifth year, they're pretty neutral. But different woods, different oaks from different areas, they breathe through oxygen at different rates. There are different thicknesses of the staves. So, you know, Bordeaux barrels will allow much more oxygen to reach the wine than a Burgundy barrel, which is thicker and heavier. Then you have oaks from other areas, Hungarian oak, Slovenian, just all sorts of factors that become part of the wow, I'm getting really dark, the aging of the wine. Yeah, so something more tannic, you might want thin oak that allows more air through. Something that you want to sort of preserve and protect, like Pinot or Grenache, you use a thicker stave barrel that protects it more from the oxygen and allows just a little bit of breathing. So, yeah, barrels are important. They're sort of vessels for me more than seasonings. But for some people, they definitely fulfill both criteria, both adding something to the wine and allowing it to grow up.
Oops. What happened? What happened?
I think somebody's sharing the screen.
Something happened. Oh, there we are.
All right. I was trying to share my screen. Sorry, I guess it's not going to work.
That's okay.
No.
We're back.
We saw the picture. Paul.
Did you?
Oh,
did it work?
Yeah, there's somebody standing in the distance.
Just don't have a.
Oh, he's showing us trees.
So this is in Allier. You know, I don't have a slideshow for you all here. This is my brother in Allier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me just a moment. I'll find some images to show you all. Give me just a few moments. I wasn't prepared for this.
Are you warm enough? Can I get your jacket? I'm good. You sure? Yeah, sure. You okay, Daniel?
We're on the topic of barrels. I'm curious, when did barrels start coming into play for wine?
I'll be back. What?
Yeah, it's a good question. Gosh, when?
Long time ago.
Yeah, definitely a long time ago. I mean, before it was barrels, it was clay amphora, or but not even glass back then. I think it was just amphora, concrete.
Well, that's why people are now bringing back concrete, but in the egg form for some more, I guess, white wines, right? And or certain sort of like clay vessels as sort of recalling to old world ways of making wine. So it's always been curious to me, when did wood come into play?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I can put a date on that, James. When wood came into play, I don't know.
Yeah, I think of it as being one of the oldest.
Find that out.
One of the oldest ways of making a container.
And it's interesting too, because when you're thinking about concrete or clay, it seems that there's maybe less science on it in terms of here's a vessel and that's it, whereas wood has particle sort of qualities to it that is also environmentally based.
I also think it's the right tool for the right job as well, James, because you'll find with people using amphora, the wines tend to breathe in amphora much more than they do in the most inert barrels, which are of Eastern European origin, the Hungarian and Austrian and Slovenian forest barrels. And Slovenia, folks, is a forest in northwestern Croatia. That's where Slovenian barrel comes from. It's not Slovenia. It's a forest department in Croatia. Man, that's such a good question, James. You're gonna get me on a tear with that question. I like that. Yeah. So the amphora breathe more, and the amphora were how they used to make wine way back in the day, I suppose, before barrels. Nowadays, you're gonna find amphora being used more and more. I find it with whites. You'll find it in Friuli, right along the border of Slovenia, where it's something that's been being used more and more. In conjunction with a method of skin contact with these whites, creating really interesting orange wines, crazy wines. And those amphora, some come from Spain, but most of those come from the Middle East. Sicily is also doing it, and a lot of that is Spanish amphora. And it's so crazy to go into these aging rooms because you walk into this room and it's just a bunch of plaques on the floor. That's the aging room because they sink the amphora into the earth to allow for the natural temperature of the earth to take care of their wines, which is kind of cool. What are your experiences with amphora, Pietro? You're in a very kind of film noir.
Yeah, none yet.
None yet? I know.
I'm anxious to get started, though.
But people are doing it around here. I know one winemaker who's playing with Ribolla Giallo, which is a native grape of northern Italy, and it's a white grape, but with a lot of varietal expression. And that's kind of a shoo-in for amphora because it handles it well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely the concrete eggs; those are becoming pretty common.
Yeah, and I've always had questions about concrete because I never understood why you'd want to put your wines in concrete. And I know that's the way they did it back in the day, and to me, I just never got it. And I've asked a number of winemakers the concrete question. I've heard answers as far as concrete gives a slight minerality to the wine, which I think is bullshit. I don't know, Pietro, you tell me what you think. I find that the answers—
That makes me nervous.
That makes me nervous too, because concrete's not natural. But for me, I think it has to do with insulation and the ability to control temperature. Like Brico uses glass-lined concrete eggs. And so it's basically glass.
Yeah, so that makes it inert.
Concrete must control the temperature, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the whole point of doing it in concrete, yeah.
If it's unlined, it will breathe a little bit.
It will, but only in the imperfections inside that concrete of how it was made.
So that's—
improper breathing in large boti, Eastern European boti, is a result of burrs inside the wood and improper stave handling. I just wonder with concrete, like it's all man-made.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have the same synergy feeling.
Yeah, there must be little pockets in concrete that the wine can escape into and breathe a little bit, whereas other places it won't. I don't know.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. The concrete rate.
The couple of wineries that I've been to where the producers were trying to explain their use of the eggs was that it was more inert, and also the egg shape allows for, in a way, sort of the wine is not, there's less surface area or something like that of the wine to the surface of some way. So in itself, it's more in trying to preserve the natural aging of the wine without any effect from whatever surface that it's in.
Right.
What they were saying is why they're using concrete.
Absolutely. And I don't know too much about fermentation in concrete. Pietro, please jump in. But also, I know that the shape of it sometimes has to do with the way in which they want to ferment the juice. That there are some shapes of concrete that ferment at different temperatures. And that literally has to do with the shape of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct, Peter?
Sometimes there's like a convective force that moves things around inside slowly as well.
It's the whole point of having an upright conical fermenter. Because you have even space all around, right? That's what I thought.
There's something magical, but I'm not tuned into it yet.
Yeah.
To understand it.
Me neither. I'm curious as hell though.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, it's been 2 hours. This has been a pretty good discussion. Do we have any last minute questions before we close our conversation here? I know we've lost a few folks.
I would just like to say thank you to Pietro.
Yes.
It's been fascinating to hear what he has to say and enlightening. And I very much enjoyed his Barbera, I have to say. When I first opened it, if you'd asked me for a lineup, I was like hesitant. But at the end of the evening and with sitting with it opening up, I have really enjoyed it. So congratulations. And it's all been very enlightening. Thank you, Paul, Pietro, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
In vino veritas.
I agree. Yeah, well, we've got a lot more of these coming up. You all have seen the schedule, and I'll have 3 packs and 2 packs available next week for our rosé class or tasting. And Piero's giving me a run for my money. I've got to find a good Southern Italian rosé from Apulia. I think I found one, Bombino Nero. Have you tasted that before?
Is that a rosé?
Yeah, it's a rosé.
Oh, they do make a rosé. That's
The
right.
Ferrante.
I've had the red.
Yeah, you've had the Ferrante. Yeah, the red. They make a Bombino Nero rosé. Yeah, so
I haven't had it.
Hopefully I'll have that and one other rosé, hopefully from Sicily. So that would be tasty. And we'll be talking about Southern Italy and Rosato. Buono. Pietro, any closing words, sir?
Thank you everyone for attending and for sitting for 2 hours. And I'll get some lights in here. It'll make more sense. But thank you. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I also extend my thank you as well. And salute to everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for hosting.
Oh, my pleasure, of course. And we'll have more of these.
Ciao tutti.
Ciao tutti. Ci vediamo. Thank you everyone for coming.
Ci vediamo. Sì.
Ci vediamo.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Gracias.
Leave.